Thank you. Okay, so I don't have an American accent, so as you can probably tell, I'm not born and raised in New York. I'm from South Wales. I did my undergrad work in Liverpool University, went on an exchange program in my senior year and met my husband, who was from NYU, and then I moved to America. I've been living there for a long time, I'm not going to tell you how long. I did my master's work actually at the State University where I'm actually teaching right now. Prior to that, I was a professor at Columbia University, Teachers College, where I got my PhD. Went back to school quite late, but it was interesting. So during my tenure at Columbia, I had students who were looking to do research in what we call an advanced practicum course, where they go into schools and they look at any topic that really gets their attention. They bring it to me, and then I would say, okay, let's do that or let's not do that. And at the time, as you can see, I'm a play person. During my first year at Columbia, they said, pick something for your dissertation that you know you're going to love within the next 20 years because that's all you're going to be doing. And here I am, over 20 years later, still researching play, so it was a good choice. So my student wanted to look at a play-based curriculum. And so we searched the whole of New York, and with the public schools, we kind of as cyclical to you. We've gone through the play thing, and now we're way into the standardized testing route, which is really unhappy because there are a lot of teachers in New York that are leaving preschools and kindergartens because they don't like the testing. So I finally found the Blue School, which was just starting out. It was 2005. And the way it started was being Blue Men. I presume you know that it's related to the Blue Man Group, the entertainment group that paint their faces blue. Being entertainers and being quite wealthy, they decided that because they could not find a preschool for their own children, they would make one. And so they wanted something that was play-based, that was creativity-based, and so that's when the Blue School was founded. So they got together lots of different people to support them. So Ken Robinson is on the board. Dan Siegel, who's a huge mindfulness person, he's on the board. So they got together experts to help them because they had all these ideas that they didn't know how to put into practice. So to back up on the story, I took my student down, and they were in the early days. They had 17 or 18 families in pre-K. And we worked down there for about a whole semester, maybe 3 months. And as I was leaving, they said to me, would you be interested in developing some curriculum for them? And here I am, almost over 10 years later, after developing their curriculum, developing play benchmarks for them, which was really exciting. We did play standards for them, looking at how teachers can incorporate play and how we can take this model to other schools, still doing research there. So let me move forwards. Oh, okay. Let me go back to this one. These are children at the school. We're at the museum of, there's a children's museum in the middle of New York that the one child here is at. And here these children are playing with letters. Can you see what shape she's forming with her body? Yeah, the teachers in the kindergarten classroom couldn't work out how to get children to distinguish between P and B. And because they are very kinesthetically aware and everything is done, a lot of stuff is done with movement, they were making shapes with their bodies in that photograph. So that's there. We're going through a very bad stage in New York and in the United States in general, where play is disappearing from the classroom. I'm sure you are possibly aware of that. About maybe a year ago, I took a student of mine into the city who was student teaching down there. And I went to the office and I said, my student's in a kindergarten class, can you show me where she is? She directed me to a classroom. I walked in. The children were sitting in rows. They had an overhead projector, which is really old-fashioned now for schools. But what the teacher was doing was she was doing handwriting and letter recognition with them on an overhead. And I went back to the office and I said, excuse me, I think you've sent me to the wrong classroom. And they said, no, that's kindergarten. No rug, no dramatic play area. Then about maybe 6 months ago, I had a teacher who was taking one of my graduate courses. She had gone back for the semester, gone into her classroom, and her rug was gone, her kitchen area was gone. So she went to the office and said, excuse me, what's happened to my stuff? Did you put it in storage? Am I moving? And they said, no, the principal told us there's not to be any more play in your classroom. We don't have time for it. So that's the environment right now. we're competing with academics, we're competing with testing, we're competing with all these different things that are going on. Teachers who come into my play class, my graduate play class, the main reason they come to me is asking the question, how can I advocate for play in my classroom? How can I fight for it with my administration? And not just with the administration, but with parents who are really looking at what the media is telling their children need. And also with other teachers who say that, no, this is not a worthwhile activity for our children. They need to be doing more rote learning. And what we're finding in the States is that social emotional learning is just being thrown out of the window. Our children are not sharing, they're not negotiating, they're not collaborating, and this is being evident in our dropout rate, and it's also becoming evident in our middle schools, where children just can't sit and learn. So it's a really sad state of affairs at the moment. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we know that play is the true key for development. And all these things that I've mentioned here on the slides are what we do with children in the classroom, so I'm not going to talk much more about that. At Blue School, we look a lot at neuroscience. It's a new, it's the vogue thing at the moment in our preschools and our kindergarten schools. We're looking at the way neuroscience is developing and how the research is developing and how we can actually use that with children in the classroom to support their learning, to dictate the environment the children learn in, and to look at the ways that teachers can adapt their curriculum based upon the theory that's out there. We know that when children are born, they have all these connections that are made. And what happens is it's a kind of a snooze you lose. They don't connect, or they're there and they don't make the connections. The neurons are there and they don't make the connections. And we know that there are far too many connections throughout the brain. So what happens is these get lost when we don't use them. So the purpose of the neuroscience research out there is to show us how we can make those connections, how we can forge them, how we can build on them in order for the pruning that takes place to best support the way that the children are learning within the classrooms. So we now know that the children's, and all this research has come from a lot of, I'm unable to do my own neuroscience research, obviously, with children in the lab because I don't have the facilities. But what we do have at Blue School is we have a connection with the iLabs Institute, which is over in California, which is connected to Dr. Patricia Kuhl, Dr. David Melenkoff, and with Alison Golpnik. I'm not sure if you've heard them, the scientists in the crib. We work closely with them to look at what research they are doing. They then support us with the teachers telling us what kind of things we can actually do that's related to the latest science. So we now know that the circuitry that's being built is dependent to a great degree on the daily experiences of children. Now, we knew that before. We knew that the environment actually supports children. But what we didn't really know was that these environments are actually forging those connections that are happening in the brain, and that the environment is actually shaping those neural circuits. What we do know now is that this neuroscience has linked feelings and thinking explicitly to the brain's emotional and executive functioning. What we're finding in our public schools in New York is that children, when they get to middle school, their executive functions are just not working. They are really bad at problem solving, critical inquiry. Their lack of organization, I don't know about if any of you teach freshmen. I'm finding that my freshmen have very little executive functioning skills. They cannot organize their life. They cannot organize their work at all. And if we look back to the experiences that they had in preschool, a lot of it is linked to this. These little guys are playing in the playground, as you can see, and what they're doing is obviously building some of those connections. So we can now literally identify how children learn best. And one of the ways that children learn, we now know, is by reflecting, sitting still, taking it in. We practice mindfulness at the Blue School. I'm not sure if are we familiar with mindfulness here? It's a huge thing for the children. They come in the mornings, they sit. They don't engage in meditation, but they just sit and think quietly. The teachers engage in mindfulness throughout the day. And basically what the children are doing is they're engaging in reflective practice, because neuroscience has shown us that reflective practice helps to build those neural connections and also to emphasize them. And this calming effect has the effect upon on the amygdala of the hub of emotional responses at the center of the brain. So this is what is actually happening. These quiet moments are allowing children to reinforce what they've learned throughout the day, to go back and reflect on what they've been doing. And we also now know that play, active play, will selectively stimulate these growth neurons in the amygdala where the emotions are processed, and the prefrontal cortex where executive functions are processed. So the amount of activity and play that a child engages in will actually support the way that these parts of the brain are being developed. So attention span, language processing, sensing rhythms, monitoring and processing thoughts, and planning for the future. So all those things that we thought play did, we now have neuroscientific research that shows us that this is what is happening in the brain. And also, what's happening when children play is they're making sense of their world through play, through stimulation, through testing things out within a safe environment, which then is causing these neural paths to generate. We knew that children's brains develop most during the early years. We know this Alison Gopnik describes a child's thinking as an adult on 2 cups of triple espresso, going to Paris for the first time and falling in love. That's how a child is so stimulated. That's how she describes it. And this is what these little guys are experiencing every day. It's all this is going on. And so if you can imagine, this is a part of the reason why they need to reflect and they need to process what's going on through reflection. And this activity is actually fostering the creation of these new circuits and testing them out as children are playing. And because it's in a safe environment, we know that young children are wired to survive. Everything they do is wired for survival. They're safe and they can carry out the activities that they're doing. So these processes then actually result in mapping that goes on in the brain. So play, as it's happening, maps these different areas of the brain for responses. And over time, these maps expand and they develop to support the recognition of all sorts of objects, sounds, colors, social settings. So during play, the child is actually reflecting on what they're doing. Okay, let me go back over here. Is this it? There we go. Oh, thank you. Okay, so the variety of the maps that a child makes inside the brain, inside the brain that's happening, will actually dictate the experiences that they have and the different kinds of learning that takes place. And pretend play, dramatic play, rough and tumble play all produce different maps that go on in the brain that come together. And this is how the child begins to understand its world. I'm going backwards, I'm sorry. So what do we do in the Blue School to develop this? You can walk around the school and the children are saying, oh, my brain hurts today. I'm thinking too much. I need to reflect. Or they'll say, okay, so I'm doing this. And they look at the teacher and they'll go, now I'm using the right side of my brain, right? So this means that, I'm working on my social skills. So they know, even in kindergarten and in first grade, that what they're doing throughout the day is helping to build their brains. And we've had a couple of visitors who walked around the school and say, this is impossible. They don't know what they're talking about. But when you sit with them or interact with them, they actually do know what they're talking about. And they will actually decide to do different activities. If they're problem solving, they will decide to do activities that will actually work on different kinds of skills that they're trying to build. So what happens too is that there are periods of this reflective practice, excuse me, that's integrated throughout the day. And in any one morning session, you'll see children disappear off to the quiet area of the room to sit and think about what they've done, because this becomes part of their normal daily routine. in fact, so what they're in essence doing is they're becoming leaders of their own learning. And they will say to each other, okay, you're getting a little bit too hyper here. Can we calm down? Can we sit and can we think? So they really are incorporating that. I just put this little video up here. To show you that this is what I show my students, if I can get this working. Oops, sorry. Technology is great when it works, right?
Oh, yeah, on here. How do I...
This is actually my grandson, who's not this small right now. And my daughter keeps saying, I'm not telling you anything about him until he's 7 years old because I don't want you telling me what I'm doing wrong. But I feel a little like he's my research tool because I've been watching him since he was born. And she actually has moved from Liverpool. I'm back in my days, if I can get this thing. She's moved from New York to Chicago. So now I have a rich amount of videos that I can use because she sends them to me. So this particular day, I started screaming at her because he has rocks. And I'm like, what is he doing with rocks? But if you watch what he does, it's really, I can't get it back. Let's see. Yeah, I know. Yes, there we go. And it's just like 2 seconds, but I showed you, and I show this to my students, and I say, look at everything that's going on there. You know, like he's suddenly realizing that when he shakes it, it makes a noise, and then when he loses it, he looks inside to say, okay, well, where's that noise gone to? And then he sees that the stone has gone, and he tries it all over again. So just thinking about that 2 seconds that's going on there, thinking about all the brain connections that are happening within that 2 seconds of motion, all the learning that's happening there. So I just had to show you that. So at Blue School, we've looked at what we need to research in order to build a curriculum that supports all areas of learning. So we've come up with these 4 areas: neuroscience and self and social awareness, creativity and innovation, grit and perseverance, and curiosity and play. And when we've looked at students that have gone from our school into, because what has happened is that the children used to be with us from the age of preschool through to 2nd grade. And then what we developed was another school that moved on from 2nd grade to 4th. And last year, we've developed a school that's gone from 5th to 8th grade. Some of our students have left. Blue School is very expensive. It's $35,000 a year for tuition, but it's supported by funding from outside resources. But a lot of parents, even with the funding, can't afford to keep their children there. So several children, myself and the teachers, what we've done is we've followed students as they've left to go back into the regular school system. And what we found is that those students lose in these areas, particularly in creativity and in grit and perseverance and curiosity. I was just talking when we were setting up about children at the Blue School. It's a lab school, so we have visitors all the time. So the children are very used to people walking in and out, and they're very curious. You walk into the Blue School, they'll come up to you and they'll say, oh, how are you? Oh, I like your tie. How are you doing? You know, where are you coming from? And they'll have this huge conversation. But those children that have left us, they lose that curiosity to a certain extent, and they certainly lose their creativity. So what we're finding is that these are the things that we need to look at, and we need to incorporate in our curriculum in order for our children to take control of their own learning. And so what we're talking about today is just one minor part of what we're doing. We've also found that education is more than just the 3 hours of reading and writing. Reflection, resilience, and relationships are also important. So in other words, we feel at the school that all knowledge takes place through social construction. So the children need to be moving, they need to be talking with each other. But they also need to do the reflection, which we talked about before, but we're also finding that they have resilience. They will start on a project and they will keep going. They will not give up. They'll keep going forward with that. And we're not quite sure how that's happening. We're not quite sure what we're doing in the school that's supporting that, and whether it's due to these neuroscientific methods that we're using, or if it's just the fact that children feel comfortable in the space. We tell them that there is no real right or wrong way to answer a question. There are just multiple ways of coming to the answer. And so they tend to do that. So these are some of the things we do. The reflection, so that they have the power of their own learning, and the neuroscience. So this is just how we've done it. We do the usual data collection methods. We have informal conversations with the teacher. I visit once a week, and we will go around and we'll have conversations as to what's going on. The teachers have reflective meetings with the curriculum directors throughout the school. So once a week, they'll sit and reflect on their own teaching and what's been happening within the classroom. We do videotaping, audio taping, and anecdotal notes. And what we're developing at the moment is a qualitative study that will show where we're going with all these 4 things and how they're helping the children to learn. These are the things that the teachers do. They incorporate the scientific research about the child development into the curriculum. Each grade level has 2 classes. And those teachers will meet with development specialists during the week, once a week or once every 2 weeks, to talk about any articles, any neuroscience research that's come out that they think will be relevant for what they're doing. And then because we're a lab school, we develop those findings, and we'll probably put them into professional development, which takes place once a week. And then if it gets to the point where we decide that this is something that really needs to happen school-wide, then we will incorporate it into the design of the school and the curriculum. So it's a step process. We observe the children, what they're doing. We talk to them. I mean, this is a huge beef of mine, is that we will do research. You can sit and watch a child for 3 or 4 weeks, and if I ask him the question that's been on my mind, he'll tell me the answer without me having to watch him. We just have to trust the fact that they can actually talk to us, and have a conversation. So it's a process. We observe what's going on in the classroom. We talk to the children. We talk to the teachers. The teachers engage in professional development. They engage in these reflection processes. And then we have meetings once, maybe 3 to 4 weeks, and then we'll discuss whether these things need to be incorporated into the curriculum. Today for students and teachers, because of this executive function. And the children, as I said, identify and understand the use of language such as metacognition and executive function, and they know that there's not one definition, that each one of them has a definition of their own for these things that they will present to us. Multitasking, we found that multitasking doesn't actually help brain development. In fact, in a lot of cases, it impedes it. Children who try to multitask a great deal are usually the ones who are unable to focus or don't actually meet the objectives of what they're trying to learn. So we've tried to push out multitasking to a certain extent so that we can concentrate on specific skills. If I can go back to some research that we did maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we were finding that their language skills were amazing. Their reading skills were developing along the trajectory that we thought they would do, but their writing skills were very, very poor. There were gaps. And because it's an inquiry-based curriculum where the children take the lead, we were finding that because they were so vocal, because they could communicate through speech and language, that they didn't want to write. They found no purpose in writing. There was no purpose for them. So it was really hard for us to focus on the skill of writing and the skill of communicating through text. So we went back and we just tried different methods. And then one day, we were doing what they call a penny harvest. I don't know if you have that. We were collecting money around the classrooms. We do a lot of things for charities abroad and things like that. And the children were like, this was 2nd grade, and they were saying, well, how do we do this? How do we get the message around the school that, we're doing this? And so one little boy goes, well, we can do a poster, And then they were like, oh, well, we have to write on a poster. What do we do now, And so then another child goes, well, how do we get it to the other classrooms? And this one little boy says, well, we can just get an envelope and we'll put their names on the envelopes and then we'll distribute them to the classroom. And they were like, can't write each other's names. So it was kind of like this aha moment for them that they actually did need to write in certain circumstances. And so we built it as an inquiry process. So now they had to go to classrooms, get classroom lists of names, they had to write them, so this is how we got them writing. And so we had to go back to the teachers who had the impression that a child-directed curriculum was child-directed, literally, and that the teacher just let them go with it. So we went back and said, okay, there are some skills that children really need to be taught in order for them to be inquirers. And so it took us another year to step back and now build a curriculum to incorporate reading, writing, and language together so that we weren't trusting the children to do things that they didn't like by themselves. And also teachers, because I remember going into a classroom with a teacher one day and saying, so what science did you do this week? Oh, I haven't done any science. I don't like science. No, you can't do that. And we also get this with teachers. Teachers love to come to Blue School to work because they have been taught in their education programs at universities and colleges and schools of eds around the country that this is the best way to learn. And they get into a public school, and obviously they can't. A public school for us is a state school. They can't learn that way. So they come to Blue School thinking that, wow, now I can teach this way. But what they don't realize is that teaching this way is 100 times more difficult than teaching when you have a scripted curriculum. And some of them can very easily make the transition, but a lot of them can't, and they go back to working in public schools because they just can't. So to go back to my point, we now know that multitasking does not always work. We need to go in and teach those skills. Another example is we scaffold learning about negotiation and behavior management by having the children discuss what they're doing. Doesn't always work, but we try hard. And we used to try a lot of art therapy, where they would sit and draw pictures. And they would make a book of a relationship they had with another child if that child was particularly, it was a relationship that was particularly difficult. But what we were finding was that, yes, the theory of art therapy was great, but they couldn't draw. And so they would get frustrated and they couldn't actually draw their feelings. So here we are going back to looking at, we need to build those foundational skills in order for them to become inquirers. And we found that this concentration creates those neural connections that result in a long-term synaptic change. The reflection and the engagement in single activities actually build those connections in a stronger way. This is the Blue School. Isn't it lovely? It's right down by the... we've actually been in 5 different places since we started. We started off in a little tiny room next door to the theater where the Blue Man work. Then we moved to a place down on Avenue B and 2nd Avenue, I think it was. And the last day of school, the 4-year-old teacher they were saying goodbye, they were sat in the circle, and all of a sudden a bullet comes through the window and goes right past her shoulder into the board behind. And it wasn't a bad neighborhood, it was just that it happened. So we moved after that. And that's another story. We had a lot of issues, because this is another part of the reflective practice with the children. It was the last day of school. They were leaving for summer break. This happened. The teacher that they were with was not returning in the fall. So they never really got a chance to unpack. They never really got a chance to reflect on what had happened. And when they came back in the fall, because at that point there was only one class per age range, they were all together again, mostly. We had a lot of aggression issues. We had a lot of fighting. We had a lot of non-negotiation. It was a mess. It was a total mess. And looking back, we feel that it was a problem because they hadn't unpacked what the experiences that they'd had. So then the next move from there, we went to the Cooper-Hewitt building, which was interesting because the Cooper-Hewitt building is an old university that, I don't know if you're familiar with it, was an engineering-based college, and they had moved campuses, and they just moved out and left the building, and we rented and moved in. So they had a soundproof room, and we had benches where they made electrical parts, and we had mechanics, so that we just turned them into labs for the kids to play with. Then we moved here. This is the old Merchant Seaman building, which is down on the Lower East Side in South Street Seaport. And this is where we're housed now. And we've actually built a bridge from this school to what is the Children's Museum on South Street Seaport. The Children's Museum is downstairs and we're upstairs, and that's where our 5th graders are right now. So hopefully this is the permanent home for the Blue School. Founded for their 2-year-olds. Based upon creativity, curiosity, and collaboration, they're the core components of the curriculum. Child-centered, integrated curriculum, inquiry-based, emphasis on social emotional learning, integration of cognitive science, research, and theory. Parent involvement is huge. I'm not sure what's happening here with parent involvement. In the United States, it's rapidly disappearing from the classroom. I used to incorporate a parent involvement project for my sophomore students, but they're going into schools now and they're not seeing parent involvement at all. It's sad. But the 2-year-old program at Blue School, you have to be, parents have to join. They're part of the process. And we also have a supported autonomy program that goes on there. It's a lab school. I was asked if it's okay to show photographs. We have people coming in all the time, so we have permission. Professional development is totally at the center of the programs, and teacher inquiry is also a strong component. Friday afternoons, the teachers get together and at the beginning of the semester, they develop an inquiry question for their classrooms. And throughout the semester, they work on that inquiry question through action research in their classroom. And a lot of them will publish papers. They will take the show on the road and do workshops. So there's a lot of ownership that goes on in the school. For instance, there's no block areas in the classrooms. There's a block area on one floor of the school. And so all the children can be taken to that block area anytime. So you go to this area, and anytime during the day, you'll see 2-year-olds working with 4th graders building blocks. And I know for those of you who've worked in a preschool, you can't get children to cooperate within these areas. So what the children do at Blue School is they're asked to put signs on their work. So this one goes, we are making ramps to see how balls go down. Would you like to add to our building? And from Ryan, Vivian, Samantha, and the teacher's written the names. So what in essence happens is they'll walk away and leave that, and they'll hope that the children who come in to play in that area will now build upon their work rather than knocking it down. So, oops, I don't have that one in there. So what you'll see sometimes are these incredible block buildings that have taken place. And then what happens then during community meeting, the teachers will say, okay, we have this huge construction in the block area. Let's take a vote. Who wants to take it down and who wants to leave it? And if they vote to take it down, we take photographs. If they vote to leave it, we leave it. They leave it. So they all have an input on what they do. This is the educational model that we use. I know I'm deviating from neuroscience, but I thought you'd be interested in Blue School, right? This is probably the 7th transition of the educational model that we've done. And as you can see, we have the child is at the center of the model as the inquirer. The outside ring are the content areas that the children will work on. Not just content with relationship to math, science, ELA, but with physical awareness. We've got social emotional learning in there. The expressive arts are thrown in there. And then if you look here, you'll see hero, trickster, artist, innocent, group member, and scientist. And if you look closely, you see that scientist is opposite artist, hero is opposite innocent, and group member is opposite tricksters. And trickster is generally a child that is very intrapersonally motivated. This is pulled from the Blue Man School. And when I first started, from the Blue Man Group, sorry, when I first started with them building the curriculum, they said, here's what we do in the show. Can you show us how we can interpret this in the classroom? Because they have the view that these are the characters that they represent on stage. And their idea is that it's almost similar to Gardner's theories of learning styles. But the way we use the wheel is that we have children who may be group members. They're very good in groups. And then we'll have a child that's very much a trickster who will play up in the classroom, what we would say play up, but is actually being very independent. We'll try to push those children to the opposite side of the wheel so that we'll put them in different situations where they can't be a trickster or they don't have the environment to do that. They have to become part of a group. Or we'll introduce the artist to a group of scientists where we're trying to push them outside the box, in other words. And the idea behind this is that they won't always look at the world through the lens that they're familiar with. They will become familiar with all the lenses that are out there, and they might not use it 100% of the time, but when they come across a problem or a critical thinking problem that they need to solve, they might decide that, hey, I can't do this on my own. I need to become part of a group. And so their thinking will push them to like, okay, well, yesterday when Lindsey told me to do such and such a thing, I wasn't successful, but now maybe if I go ask Johnny to help me, then I can do it. So this is the purpose of the wheel, and this is what they do on their shows if you've ever been to see them. They make you feel very uncomfortable sometimes by pushing you outside the box. And it's not that we want to make children feel uncomfortable, but we want them to explore their own behaviors, their own ways of learning, the way that they apply the skills that they have, and the need to develop, not the need, but the desire to develop other things. And here's some more about them. It enables the inquirers to explore academic content areas from a different variety of perspectives. And the teachers will actually use that model to plan. So they'll meet and they'll decide that a child needs X, Y, Z to do within the curriculum. And what they'll do is they'll set up their environment to be more of a, let's go back, let's have a look. So let's see, how can I, if they're working on, let's use an example then. Okay, we have a music teacher that comes around. She comes into the classrooms every day. And one day she brought in a set of instruments, I think it was the cymbals, and she had, the classroom sizes are up to 15, so she had 15 sets of cymbals. And the teacher was like, no, can you bring in different materials, different instruments today? And the music teacher was, well, why? And she said, well, I'm working on sharing. You know, I don't want them to have the same instrument each so that they don't say, I want to do that, I want to do that, I want to do that. So on that particular day, she was working on becoming a group member because the children were having a lot of difficulty sharing. And so she wanted them to have the experience of having to do that, which is what happens to all of us when we teach. We think in that way, but we're trying to give the teachers the skills or the support, rather, to do that. So this is how we use that model. Let's see. It's based upon the multiple intelligence theory of Gardner. It supports them as they explore and strengthen their learning skills. They're building their repertoire of tools, developing a stronger and more complex and versatile identification of who they are, which then goes back to the neuroscience part, is we're working on building those connections that will support them. These are the 6 lenses. I can pass this on to you if you want. Group member, scientist, hero, lens of perseverance, commitment, trickster, play, innovation, artist, imagination, creative expression, and innocent, the lens of emotional awareness and mindfulness. Those are some of them. And they're there again. I can pass this on to you. Okay, this is how the children play. We don't call it literacy, they play with literacy. This is one of the little girls she's in the 4-year-olds, and they're doing letter recognition and patterning. She's in a terrible mess. And I don't know if you can see here, but what she's done is she's laid out a pattern of letter number, letter, number. She hasn't been told to do that. She's just been playing with it. And then the teacher walked over to her a little while later, and this is what she's doing. Do you know what she has in her hand? You know when you leave paint stand for a long time and you have a skin on the top? She's actually removed the skin off the top, and she's trying to make it into the shape of letters, which was really interesting. She was left to do that by herself. And then the children play with math. In this particular instance, they were looking at shapes. And so the teacher had duct taped different shapes on the floor, and they're sitting there, they're collecting information from around the room to emphasize the use of shapes. Inside, outside, this teacher's working on inside, outside. We were having a lot of problems with our little guys being dropped off during the day. And so they developed these little spaces for them to stay in so that they could feel safer. I'll go back to that one. And eventually what we did was they laid out cardboard boxes from the outside of the classroom to the inside of the classroom. And the children felt really safe as they came in. And then they popped up the other side and was, yay, here we are, you know. And that was a lot of fun for them to do, a lot of fun for the teachers. They constructed their own things. And then the 2-year-old teachers saw us doing that or the 3-year-old teacher saw us doing that in the 2-year-olds. And then she decided to do this with her tables, where they laid fabric over. And if you can see, there's Laura underneath the table herself. She's doing it first so that the children will follow. So that's how we're playing with supported autonomy. Like I said, reflection is huge. We followed, when we were first starting the curriculum, we couldn't decide, well, not that we couldn't decide. The objective of the school was to look at the theory that is there, look at what works, look at what we can't use, and let's pull in all the theories that we can use. So we looked at Reggio Emilia. We looked at, what else did we look at? Oh gosh, my mind's gone a blank now. We looked at a ton of different things. And so a lot of this school, it's not a Reggio Emilia school by any means, but it's based a lot on their documentation. So throughout the day, the teacher will take photographs. She'll print them out, and then she'll call the children over at different times to look at the photographs and ask them, what were you doing there? What were you doing? Reflecting on the play that's happening, so that they can actually think about it and internalize it. And then this is what happens with the older children. They have a notice board that they put things on. The sticky notes are other children who are putting their ideas on the board to share with each other. And there's another example of them doing it. They're reflecting together. I'm running out of time. This is another 2-year-old classroom, and they were having a lot of supported autonomy, self and social awareness issues. So we developed a sensory table that before this reached the whole length of the classroom, so that they could spread out and interact, and then gradually every morning when they came in, we made it smaller and smaller. So they had to work closer and closer together. And this little guy, he's looking at, it's actually, I think they have popcorn, unpopped popcorn in there. And he's looking at it. And if you could see over here, I'm sitting in the corner here, and he was dropping popcorn on my head to see what reaction I would have. And he kept saying, it's raining, it's raining. And then all of a sudden, a little girl from the other side of the classroom comes over with an umbrella for me, because it was raining that day, and she pops up the umbrella, she's here! And so I sat under the umbrella and watched. But they're reflecting on what their actions and the cause and effect. I just thought I'd show you one project that they do. We're right, like I said, by the the Brooklyn Bridge. So they were doing a project on what do I see outside my window? And they saw the bridge, and they wanted to reconstruct some bridges in the classroom. So each child was allowed to do this independently and then come back and work together. This little one, what is on the wall here is a line drawing of the Brooklyn Bridge that an engineer did at some point when the bridge was being constructed. He's actually developing his own on the floor. I mean, that's how involved he is. This little one, these two children wanted to go outside and look outside and draw it, so they did. That's what they did. let's go back, sorry. Then we found out that one of the children in the class had a grandfather who was actually a bridge designer. And he came in and he spoke to the children, you can see, and they took photographs and made notes. And he described to them how the Brooklyn Bridge was actually made and constructed. And then what they did was they went away in groups and they constructed their own bridges. Do I have another one? And they were incredible, what they did. So I'm nearly done. I've got 10 minutes to spare. This is what I've discovered so far working at the school and working on their neuroscience development and everything else. These children demonstrate really strong problem solving and critical thinking skills. They'll, as the teachers say, they'll give it a go. It doesn't matter what it is. They'll give it a go and see if they can do it. Their literacy skills are very diverse. A lot of, one thing that they've had to work hard on is buy-in with parents. Children don't develop the way you want them to. So some of these children are lagging behind, but they're not really lagging behind. They're just developing at their own speed. And they're allowed to do that. So parents need to understand that just because one child, well, we all have this in classrooms, that just because their child is not developing at the same speed doesn't mean that they won't. The children are very aware of their own learning styles, and they utilize it. So if they're given a problem to solve, they'll know the resources that they need, and they'll seek them out. They're curious, they're definitely not afraid to ask questions, and they're persistent, and they're willing to take risks. They don't mind being wrong, and that's mostly because the teachers don't mind being wrong. You know, if they don't know something, they'll say, hey, let's find that out. There's no technology. We have technology, but we have a computer outside each classroom. There are no computers inside the classroom. So a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of months ago, sorry, walking down the hallway, and this little 4-year-old was walking around. I go, where are you going? And he goes, oh, I want to find out something. So I said, what are you going to do? Oh, I'm going to Google it, he said. And I said, well, what are you going to do if you can't Google it, if they don't have the answers? I'll Bing it, he goes, because our 2 search engines. Do you have Bing? I'll Bing it, he said. And then I said, well, what if the computers are down? What do you do? Oh, I'll just go to the library then, he said. It was like they have this, you know, these skills. And then his very last answer was, I'll go to the teacher and ask her. So they're independent learners. They know where they'll get their resources from, but they'll start independently and work down. And they do create and utilize different ways to solve their problems. They come up with some intriguing ways to solve things, which I would never have thought of, and the other children don't think of. I'm trying to think what else. So there you go. I'll give you 35 minutes to answer questions. And that's my grandson's foot when he was born. Thank you. Thank you. So now you have to do the work. Sorry. Yeah. I just thought you would be interested in how the school works. I mean, neuroscience is a huge part of it, but it's not as interesting as... It's very difficult to talk about how we use neuroscience unless you know where the school is coming from. It's very controversial.